I would like to call the special meeting workshop on August the 20th, 2020 of the Wichita Public School Board. The Wichita Public Schools will be the district of choice in our region where all students and staff are empowered to dream, believe, and achieve. This is a workshop where we have some medical professions from our area here to visit with us tonight. All of these ladies and gentlemen were on the Kansas COVID workshop work group for kids, and they helped develop the KDHE gating criteria. We have Dr. Kimberly Kratitz, Dr. Stephanie Coleman, Dr. Kelly Nelson, Dr. Rebecca Reddy, and Dr. Paul Turan with us tonight. We are so very happy to have you here and to be able to talk with the medical professionals and answer the questions that all of us have as we're trying to put this grid together for the district and make the right decision for our kids. So thank you very much for being here. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Thompson.
I'm going to go very quickly. Thank you for being here and supporting Wichita kids. And we are here at our workshop number. I can't even remember what number it is, but we've had several of them. We are here to continue to labor and decide what we will do ultimately at the end of our session tonight, as our regular board meeting, what we will do as it relates to re-entering into our buildings with our children. And so with that being said, I'm going to turn it back over to our President, Cheryl Logan, to begin our workshop. Thank you.
This workshop is scheduled to be for 1 hour, and if by chance we still have questions as board members when that hour is finished, we will extend into the regular meeting time at 6 o'clock. When we're finished with the workshop, we will take a 5-minute break before we begin our regular meeting. Okay? And with that, I'm going to introduce Dr. Paul Turan, who is a longtime supporter of the Wichita Public Schools, graduated from North High School, and is now a pediatrician here in our area. So thank you very much for being here, and we appreciate your bringing us some information.
Well, thanks, board, so much for letting us come and speak with you guys today. Thank you, Dr. Thompson, for allowing us to be here. I am a parent of 2 children in the Wichita Public Schools, and my third daughter will join in a few years, too. I'm a graduate of North High School. Both of my parents were longtime educators in USD 259. I have a lot of family and friends who are teachers in the school district, and outside of that, I'm also representing the Kansas COVID Work Group for Kids, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So the Kansas COVID Work Group for Kids, let me know if you can't hear me well, was formed during the COVID pandemic to identify, address, and provide guidance on the physical, social, and psychological impacts on children as a result of the pandemic. We are sponsored.
Could you slow down just a little?
Yes, I can. And please just let me know if I need to anymore. We are sponsored by KU Wichita Pediatrics. Our work has been endorsed by the Kansas Academy of Family Physicians and the Kansas chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. And we are not necessarily a part of KDH&E, KSDE, or the local health departments, but we've been working to collaborate with them really since the beginning of this pandemic. Here is a list of our members in case you guys are interested. Overall, you can see that we have physicians from all over Kansas. We have some school mental health professionals, some counselors, and some school nurses on there as well. The 5 of us here today, you all know Kimber Cassitz. She's the Director of Health, Homebound, and 504 Services and is a great asset to USD 259 and has been a leader on our group. Dr. Coleman, who's the Medical Director at Wesley Children, Pediatric Medical Director at Wesley Children's Hospital and the Division Director for KU Pediatrics Hospitalist. Dr. Netson, who's a neuropsychologist and the Director of that department at KU School of Medicine, Wichita. Dr. Reddy, who's the founder and managing partner at Redbud Pediatrics and an excellent community pediatrician here in Wichita, and then myself. I'm going to have a quick PowerPoint, and I'll try to make it through quick so we can get to a lot of questions. But overall, we're going to provide an update on COVID-19, what's happening in our community and its effect on children. Then we're going to discuss the KSDE gating criteria and how that can be used for Wichita Public Schools. And then we'll answer some questions. So COVID-19 and children on the national level, there have been over 400,000 confirmed cases in kids, which is about 9% of all confirmed cases. This number has been increasing and has increased about 24% over the past 2 weeks. For subset reportings by states, we know that hospitalization and death are very rare in children. Across reporting states, 0.2 to 8.8% of all children with confirmed COVID need hospitalization, and 0 to 0.6% of all children cases in kids result in death. There has been a total of 90 child deaths in America due to COVID-19. For our state, this is the KD-H&E data that was posted the 19th. For the 0 to 9-year-olds, we've had just over 1,000 cases, and they have been 3% of our positive cases in our state. And for 10 to 18-year-olds, there's been over 2,000 cases and about 6%. So a total of about 9% of the cases, again, in Kansas out of the whole. We've had a total of 35 hospitalizations in pediatrics. We've had no deaths in children age 0 to 17. There have been 2 deaths in the state of Kansas in the age group 18 to 24. KD-H&E has cluster data, and for schools and daycares, which we all know have been closed for the majority of this pandemic, at least schools have been, not daycares necessarily, there have been 16 clusters that led to 78 confirmed cases, 1 hospitalization, and 0 deaths. There have been 9 clusters based on sports, and there have been 67 cases, no hospitalizations, and 0 deaths in the state of Kansas. What we know and are learning about COVID-19 and its effect on children, they are less likely to be infected than adults. When they are infected, they're less likely to have symptoms. They're often asymptomatic or have mild to moderate symptoms. There are some who can become critically ill. Age affects the infectivity. We have many studies that are showing that especially kids less than 10 years old transmit the virus less frequently than older children and adults. This is likely due to a variety of biological and behavioral characteristics of children and then also the virus. We know that household contacts are at much higher risk of transmitting than other community close contacts. Some countries have successfully reopened schools without large outbreaks, but most of those have had lower community transmission than we have here and have more contact tracing and testing than we have available at this time. We know that the success of school reopening will be directly related to the community burden of COVID-19. The safety measures that Wichita Public Schools have implemented have been great and will help a lot, but there still will be kids and staff who come to work asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic, and there's a high chance of transmitting to others. So therefore, we do recommend universal safety measures in all schools. By now, you guys have all seen the KSDE gating criteria and have hopefully had some time to digest it. We're going to talk through it a little bit now and then more in the following slides. The 5 criteria that KSDE have in their gating criteria are, the first one is student absenteeism based on the average daily attendance that you already have at baseline. The next is the 2-week county percent positive test rate. So the amount of tests that are positive out of all the tests performed. The next is 2-week cumulative county incidence rate. So the kind of the raw number per 100,000 individuals in the community over the past 2 weeks. The next is trend in county incidence rate. And lastly, there's one about the local and referring hospital capacity. Based on those criteria, you put yourself in a green, yellow, orange, or red zone. And then the Kansas State Department of Education have recommendations for, based on those criteria and what zone you put yourself in, what kind of learning options should be available to the kids in the community. That document also included suggestions or strategies to consider to promote full-time on-site learning for pre-K through 5 students. This is because it's vitally important to teach these kids, and they're going to learn a lot better in person than at home. And those include cohorting kids in groups less than 15 students, and finding ways to spread out throughout the community and in empty buildings and community buildings, and working with community partners to make sure those cohorts can happen. So you guys are probably wondering, and some of the questions have been, how do we get that data? How do we look at that chart? And so I'm going to talk through the KDH&E data reporting, and then also the Sedgwick County Health Department data reporting, and how we can make decisions together based on that. So first off, for absenteeism, the KDH&E is planning to have at least once weekly school-level surveys that can be sent to KDH&E, and then they can track your school or district based on that. That metric is not up on their website right now, but Wichita Public Schools and the nurses and the administrators probably have resources to collect this on a daily basis, and probably within your workflow already. The percent positivity, you can find the statewide percent positivity on the KDH&E website. Soon there will be data made to make it to see better of your county percent positivity. But already, and I'll show you in a second, this is available on the Sedgwick County dashboard. The 2-week cumulative incidence rate was made accessible to the public by KDH&E on their website, or was the stat and data was created and posted there yesterday on the 19th, and also the trend in the incidence rate. We can also find this from Sedgwick County Health Department as well. The local and referring hospital capacity is available on the KDH&E website, also on the Sedgwick County Health Department website. But probably at this time, this is the least important metric to look at, based on how the hospitals are functioning and how they're reporting to the health departments. It's probably best to form good communication lines with your local hospital systems, so that it can be a warning sign, like a red flag indicator for if our hospitals are stressed, that they can reach out to you and kind of say, you know, right now we feel like we're in a good spot with PPE and our hospital capacity or vent capacity, but we're moving into the yellow or orange zone. So if you look at the KDH&E website today, and you look at their COVID metrics, then there's a button that says School Gating Criteria. Once you click on that and then click on a few different lists in there, you can sort it by Sedgwick County, and you can also sort it by different age groups within Sedgwick County. This first box here that says Weekly Trends by County is the main data point that you're going to have. And you can see that they have increase or decrease arrows for Sedgwick County since March 8th. If you look at the last 4 arrows to the right, you see that we had 3 decreasing arrows saying that our trend in our county were decreasing, but then, whoops, on August 9th, we have increase. Once you're actually on that live website, you can hover over each of those arrows, and then it gives you the boxes that I've put below. So the box down and to the right that say August 9th is what I get when I hover over that red up arrow. And then the 2 other boxes are for July 26th, and I think it's August 2nd or something. Yeah, August 2nd. Once you hover it over it, you can see the county rate per 100,000 people based on their data. And if we want to get the 2-week cumulative county incidence rate, you basically have to add that 108 and the 158 together. And then you can see that we had a decreasing trend for 3 weeks and then increasing this week. Of course, trends are very hard to look at in snapshots in time. This is an incomplete data set because we don't know what's going to happen next week. But this is the data available to us today. Sedgwick County Health Department has had this table up for a few weeks, and this is all open to the public. Does my pointer work? Yeah, I think. So if we're looking, I'm going to first direct you to this arrow, or this red box, and you see that the new cases in Sedgwick County are 496 from last week, and then this week, 430. If you look at the asterisk below, this is all preliminary data. I believe that their data comes out preliminary on Monday or Tuesday, and then it's finalized by Friday, and that's because of when the tests are coming in from the past week. So the way you get the trend or you get the raw county incidence per 100,000 today is you add the 496 plus 430. I'm not going to do it in my head. And then Sedgwick County has somewhere around, I think it's 516,000 people in our community. So you divide this by 5.16 and you get the number per 100,000. And I have it on the next slide. This dashboard also has the bottom box that I have that says 9.3 and 9.2. That is the percent positive of the tests we've taken in Sedgwick County. And you can see that the past few weeks it was a 12, a 12, a 13, a 10. And now for the past 2 weeks it's been 9.3 and 9.2. Again, this is preliminary data based on, and it will be more complete tomorrow, I think, when they release more. But you can see that we're somewhere in the 9s now. The new case rate is the other box I have up here that is red squared and it says decreasing. And right now, I talked with Sedgwick County Health Department today, and we were trying to talk about how we can fit this into the Kansas, the KSD gating criteria. It's probably a little bit too premature to say that we have a decreasing trend in our county. But we can at least say that by Friday, if these numbers stay where they are, it's probably at least stable for 1 week. And so the most important community gating criteria to look at for school reopening are going to be the 2-week percent positive, which per Sedgwick County, and of course KDH&E will have a different number because their data sources are a little bit different. On their dashboard that most of the public look at on their main home page, it says 9.7. But if we look at that chart by the other link, that I think there's a hyperlink in this PowerPoint that you guys can go to, it's been 9.3 and 9.2. So I can say we're solidly in the yellow criteria for that. For the 2-week cumulative incidence rate, that's where you add the two numbers from KDH&E or you do that fancy division from the Sedgwick County Health Department. Then for KDH&E, it's either 267 per 100,000 or Sedgwick County Health Department 179 per 100,000. The reason that this isn't perfect and they're not completely lined up is because of the way the tests that they're looking at. Sedgwick County Health Department only looks at PCR tests, which is the gold standard for detecting COVID. The KDH&E will also include antigen-based testing, some presumed positives that maybe weren't tested but have the symptoms and fit all the criteria, and maybe also some antibody testing. If you guys ask me which one to look at, I think it's best to look at them both together, and it's nice that they fit in the same red category for us because that makes it easy. But they are two data sources that are both imperfect because nobody did a science experiment to set up these variables perfectly, but they're real-time stats that we're looking at. So you have to think about them judiciously and think through them logically. But I think it's fair at this point to work with Sedgwick County Health Department to go with that number. It's still in red. The trend in the county incidence rate, you saw on KDH&E, there were 3 down blue arrows and 1 red arrow. This is incomplete data, but we can say it may be unstable, but if we see another red arrow tomorrow or next week, then there's a chance that it would be increasing, and then it'd be red. Sedgwick County Health Department had this based on their stats that looked like it was stable over the past 1 or 2 weeks. So it hasn't been stable for a long time. So that's why I chose the stable in the orange zone, because we haven't had 4 or 6 weeks of stability. It's still very early stable. So what considerations for Wichita Public Schools to use this? Even with this criteria chart, these decisions are incredibly difficult. As I said, consider the percent positivity, the county incidence, and the trend in the incidence rate to determine safe school reopening. And they consider all 5 criteria for if we need or when we need to shut down, when we may need to close. This will require foresight and advanced planning to make sure that the teachers and everybody can pivot in time. The goal should be stability in learning formats while also working really hard to get these kids back in school. We recommend forming a COVID-19 advisory committee that includes board members, district leadership, nurses, teachers, community leaders, health officials, physicians, and parent representation to meet on a regular basis to help you guys with these decisions. What you can consider today is, as we were in these meetings making this gating criteria and working very closely with KSDE and KDH&E and other experts around the state, we made them probably as lenient as was safe to get kids back in school. The goal was to try to have criteria that everybody in the state can use, and we know that Wichita is very different than a lot of other districts in the state. We thoughtfully considered many similar documents from surrounding states and throughout the nation. We looked at tons of literature. So if you're going to make any alterations in this gating criteria, I would encourage you guys to review similar documents, data, and resources before you change anything. I strongly recommend against loosening any of the gating criteria or decreasing restrictions to start the year. For elementary students, which I consider pre-K through 5, they are in a different risk zone and should be treated differently than grades 6 through 12. That's because of the risk zone for transmission, but also that remote learning is going to be much more difficult and less effective for these young students. It's critical that they get a good education early so that we're not having issues with their academics further and further and for the next decade. I think the most reasonable break in age and grade, and based on school procedures and the evidence out there for transmission, is pre-K through 5 and then 6 through 12. And all efforts should be made to get elementary students back on site as soon as possible in a safe manner. We've talked about this a lot, and no matter when we open, we need to have universal COVID-19 measures in place. I think the district leadership team has done great at implementing a lot of these, but these need to be thoughtful and purposeful, and everybody needs to buy in: parents, teachers, staff, and students. The hybrid model is something that is on that KSDE gating criteria. We know that Wichita does not have a hybrid model, but instead has 3 options for parent choice, which include on-site, My School Remote, and the Education Imagine Academy. The goal of the hybrid model is to find ways to get kids in school while not overloaded in the building so that we can have physical distancing. Having these options, if enough parents choose My School Remote and the online academy, then if we have fewer kids in school, we should be able to have smaller class sizes and physical spacing and smaller cohorts of students and staff. School activities, if the community burden is too high to have safe on-site school, on-site education, all extracurriculars should be postponed or canceled. We know that, and I know personally that, especially for adolescents, extracurricular activities are key and very important, but so is prioritizing getting kids in the classroom too. I don't see a way that we can prioritize extracurricular activities without having kids on site. Even in periods of on-site education, all extracurricular activities should have very enhanced safety measures and extreme discretion for any competition between schools, and discretion for the presence of any spectators. Even if we get to a point where we have better community numbers, we should strongly consider intramurals and ways, especially for those high-risk sports. The decision time period is difficult too, because there's many factors that go on to how long you can make a decision. We don't know the characteristics of the virus in this community, and if it's we expect that it could go up quite a bit with flu season and the winter viral season coming. We assume that it could be increased with other changes in the community that are made by other leaders besides yourselves. Parents have to plan, teachers have to plan, and students need stability. We, as KCWK, think that a semester-long decision is too long. The opening and closing decisions might have different timeframes. For example, if you open for pre-K through 5, and then you may consider opening the 6 through 12 if we have 3 or 4 weeks or 5 weeks more of stability and better numbers, that opening metric time decision could be shorter for when we want to consider opening. And maybe when we close because there's a lot of community transmission. And so we know if we close, we're going to close for a prolonged period of time, you know? So these are all things that take into consideration. COVID-19 is very fluid. These are very difficult decisions, and we need to be able to prepare to adapt quickly. I do want to say thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for inviting us to be here. Thank you for taking care of our kids and our kids in our community. I do want to open the floor up to Kimber, the Director of Health, to see if she has any other input from her standpoint, and then we're able to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Turan, and the board for having us here to discuss this today. As you know, these are very difficult decisions. Our leadership team in the district has been pivoting, as Dr. Thompson would say, not just on a daily basis, but on a minute-to-minute basis and hourly basis every day, trying to figure out scenarios on how to keep our kids safe. I think it's important that we note that we have to stress more than anything else, we have all these safety measures, but really for our staff and our students and our parents, that if someone is ill, they need to stay at home. We have screening measures that we have available for people to look at the symptoms to determine, do I need to stay home? First and foremost, to kind of stop that spread before we even get to the building site. And then once we're in the building sites, respecting the measures that are put in place for safety. There's a lot of measures that we're doing, but the 3 big ones, the 3 W's, is wear your mask, wash your hands, watch your distance. And I know my arms are not 6 feet apart, but anyone that comes into my office knows that I get the tape measure out, or I have a line that you can sit over there and you can sit over there. It's not that I don't like you, we need to distance ourselves. And I feel like this is really important. We want to be successful. We want to have kiddos back in school. We have to have the safe measures in place to do so. We are looking at not only sports, safety in the schools, we're looking at specialized healthcare needs for our students, also to keep them safe. Any measures that we take for procedures to keep others safe when we need to perform those procedures. There's a lot of things going in to developing a plan to keep people safe. We are also working on isolation areas and rooms so that when we do identify someone that is experiencing symptoms of COVID-19, like a student at school, we're getting those areas ready. So we're going to be calling parents, and we really need to make sure that parents update their contact information so that when we call you, you can pick up your child as soon as possible, preferably within an hour, not letting them sit there for the whole afternoon or the day, because they're going to be in an area, we're going to change their mask out of a cloth mask to a medical grade ear loop mask, and they're going to be in an area where they would be isolated until they're picked up so that we can do that, and the cleaning measures that go in with that as well. So I want you to know that we are working on this. It's like we said when I was here on July 17th, this is more than just the school nurses. This is all of our staff and our parents working together to follow the safety measures that we're putting in place. And we are looking at working with medical experts like our Kansas COVID Work Group for Kids, the Sedgwick County Health Department, KDHE, CDC. All of our decisions are made from there, and I appreciate the opportunity to work in this district, even though the work is really hard right now, harder than any job I've ever had in my entire life. But I feel like it's the most important job I've ever had as well. So we are all here for questions, but I appreciate the opportunity to share this, and I hope the parents will take it to heart, and our staff, that we want people to be safe. All of our decisions, safety is at the forefront of us right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And you're open for questions now?
Yes.
Okay. I will start since no one is registered yet, but they will. I want to look at your KSDE gating criteria slide, and I'm sorry, I don't know the number of it, but it's the one where you put the boxes in.
Yes.
Okay, that's it. I want to make sure I know what I'm looking at. The community gating criteria, which is the first box that's highlighted, is the one that we have been looking at and had that information on Monday, correct?
Correct.
And it's now, it was 10.2, I think, on Monday, and now it's 9.7.
Yes.
Okay.
And
that kind of
9.2
jumps.
to 9.3 based on the prelim data from Sedgwick County.
Right. So we're kind of below the 10% if we use this data, and we're sitting in the yellow area, correct?
Correct.
The other two boxes, I just want to clarify the critical ones, because you said, and I think it's the fourth one, the community gating criteria is kind of the other major box that we should
Yeah,
look
they
at.
all say community gating criteria, except for the top one. So it's better to look at the
trend in
darker
county
box.
incident rate.
Yeah, the trend in county incident.
Okay, and that's the one, because you said that we should look at these two in one of your slides, maybe more than some of the others that are on this slide.
Yeah, I think the three boxes are the ones that are best for looking at reopening.
Okay, so these three boxes, which we have a yellow, we have an orange, and we have a red. And this is, these are new information to us. We did not have this information nor these criteria on Monday when we met. So we will, during our meeting at 6, have to have a discussion about these particular boxes, because we haven't discussed these. But we appreciate getting them, because more information is always better than not enough. And so thank you for bringing them to us. We just haven't had the time to really process as a board on them yet.
Yeah, you're welcome.
My second question is about the social emotional piece with students, and your recommendation to keep pre-K 5 in school if they've chosen to come on site. The parents that have chosen to go My Remote School still would be My Remote, because that's their choice. But if they've chosen to come back on site, we would have, according to your recommendation, have the pre-K 5 students back on site. Is that correct?
Yeah, and so based on this KSD gating criteria, my personal opinion is that we fall closest into the orange.
Into the orange,
And so then I go back to what orange means to us
right.
from the other page of the
I
KSD
almost
gating
have these
criteria.
memorized.
So it's like 4 clicks backwards.
Yes.
And so it says that for orange, it says pre-K through 5 should be on-site or hybrid. We don't have hybrid in Wichita Public Schools, but we have My School Remote and that parent choice. And 6 through 12 remote only. School activities are remote only. Spectators and audience are remote only. Visitor access is extremely limited. And playgrounds are still open, but there's some things we can do with capacity and social distancing.
Okay, so if we used the criteria that you have suggested, we would land up in the orange space.
And we all come to these sorts of meetings with biases, and I wish there was a way that we could get all kids back in school. But I believe in this KSDE gating criteria, and maybe some of my colleagues may have more things to say about this, but I think that this is the safest thing to do right now. And I do wish there was a way that we could get 6 through 12 back in school in a safe way.
Okay, I think we all want that. We want to go back to the way we used to do school, but we don't live in that world anymore. Okay, and again, I ask about social emotional, and one of you may want to address that issue with our students. If we looking, because we're kind of flowing between yellow and orange, but orange is your recommendation, so.
So I think There is no doubt that the social and emotional needs of students is critical, but I think, as Dr. Turan has said several times, this has to be accomplished in a way that's safe from a medical perspective and from a viral transmission perspective as well. I think the My School Remote is a great option for students to have contact with teachers on a daily basis, if I understand the way that it's going to work. And I think that contact and having adult eyeballs on these kids who are stuck at home is profoundly important. Having contact with people outside their families, just for social interaction, but also to make sure that somebody's addressing, what things look like at home and asking questions and keeping safety at top of mind. I know that's a huge concern for remote education, is all of these kids that we kind of lost a follow-up in the spring because we just didn't have a mechanism to have contact. We do know that remote education for the little itty bitties is not ideal. Getting a 5-year-old, potentially one with ADHD, to sit in front of a computer for any sort of lesson is, potentially futile. But I think the teachers have been working really hard at strategies, and there's a lot of really good resource information available right now to help maximize the use of those remote learning opportunities. And when it's safe to do so, having kids back in the school buildings to have that in-person learning is just absolutely critical. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Ron?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Ram, for coming. On the slide that says SCHD, the table there, is that, or I guess the formula that you all use, is that something that's nationwide, or is it just kind of specific to, different counties throughout the nation?
Yeah, we chose the case rate per 100,000 because that gives us the easiest number and the most standard number for a county the size of Sedgwick County.
Right.
So the formula is simply just seeing how many cases per that 100,000. It can be tough when you're in a county of only 10,000 people to use 100,000.
Yeah, but it's something that, like, if you would use it for mumps or flu, is this the same kind of formula that you would use, or is this something a little bit more specific to the coronavirus?
In a way, it's a little bit more specific to coronavirus because this is how other states getting criteria that we looked at are reporting their numbers.
Okay.
Yeah, would you mind stepping to the mic?
And state your name when you first.
Whether we like it or not, we're being broadcast live, and so we would appreciate your being to the mic.
And state your name at the start.
This is Stephanie Coleman, and I'm not an expert in epidemiology either, but I do think other rates of medical diseases and processes often get referred based on a certain population, and depending on what it is, usually 100,000 is pretty standard. So I do think it gets reported in other things. I do a lot with infant mortality statistics, and our infant mortality deaths are always reported per 100,000.
Thank you.
And then also, I think some people have heard the word aerosol. Could you explain what that means as far as the spread of the coronavirus?
Yeah, the aerosol is, the aerosol is based on the size of the viral material that can, and how long it can last in the air. And so when we talk about like a droplet or something that it requires to kind of fall quickly from your mouth and then, or within a few feet and then land on something, then somebody else has to come and touch that and then inoculate themselves. An aerosol is more about it can last in the environment and float
So
around
like
the
a
room a
spray
little bit
can,
more.
like a
Yeah,
spray
like a
can.
spray can, exactly.
Okay. And then also, what is autoimmune, and how does that factor into a person's, risk?
The autoimmune risk of COVID-19 is mostly seen in the multi-system inflammatory response, the MIS-C syndrome that we see that other.
You lost me.
Yeah. So there is a way that the virus can then, you don't have bad symptoms or maybe just a snotty nose for a few days. Yeah, and the kids, the most severe illness of the kids who've died from COVID, and then maybe a few weeks later, it has revved up their immune system so that their immune system is kind of attacking itself, and it's causing them to have different kinds of lung problems, different kinds of skin problems. Their eyes can be red, and then they can have the inflammation affect the vessels around their heart, and that can be pretty severe.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if you guys want to clarify that.
Do you want to add to that? That's fine.
Do you need more clarification?
Well, I've heard that, and I just wanted to clarify exactly, but this is between, it doesn't matter which age, right? Autoimmune, am I saying that right? Autoimmunity, or is that correct? That's not correct. Okay, how do you say it?
Yeah, come on down.
Because I've heard this being communicated, and I'm not clear on it.
So, Dr. Rebecca Reddy, and I wonder if part of the question that you have is about adults who have autoimmune problems, because
Children.
they fall into a special risk category. People with autoimmune problems have disorders of their own body in multiple different ways, like arthritis, lupus, perhaps they have special sort of blood disorders. There's a wide variety of autoimmune disorders that people have. Often to control these illnesses in which their body's immune system works against them, we put them as medical providers on special medications that decrease their body's ability to respond to infection. So they're in a special risk category that if you were exposed to influenza or COVID or pneumococcal meningitis, that they would not be able to have the response that your body or my body does, or that a 5-year-old healthy child's body does. So they're at higher risk of severe complications from COVID.
Okay. I think I understand, so.
There are very few children compared to adults who have autoimmune diseases.
Okay,
Very few.
okay,
And the vast majority of deaths in adults are an extremely different process than for children.
okay,
Very different.
thank you.
Thank you. Julie Hedrick?
Thank you to all of you very much for coming. Safety is very important to our board and to our school district, and so to have you medical professionals here to help us sort all of that out is just extremely valued. So we thank you very much. And I also appreciate the new gating criteria, because as Ms. Logan said earlier, when we talked on Monday, we only had one factor to look at. And it seems like to me that it's extremely helpful to have more than one data point. So now we have 3 data points to look at. So we can be more confident of our opinion. We can have, we can be more confident of the guidance. We can be more confident when we have to finally make a decision, which is very difficult for all of us. I have a couple of questions in addition to what you've presented. And my first one is, in the criteria on our gating criteria sheet, in both the yellow and the orange categories, they've separated out pre-K through 5 from 6 through 12. So is this for the medical reason that you stated earlier, relative to 10-year and younger being less likely to transmit the disease and all of that?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so so those are divided for a medically supported reason.
Yeah, and the numbers we have through KDH&E break it down 0 to 9 and 10 to 17. So it's not a perfect K through 5, because we know that 5th graders are going to be 10 to 11, I think. Still, those 10 to 11-year-olds are probably best fitted throughout a school system with the pre-K through 5, knowing that everybody's going to be using masks. Because as you grow up, as you get older in the teenage years and teenage behaviors and teenage biology, you're going to be more likely to transmit it.
Okay, so that's very helpful. So it's a medical reason for those divisions, but then also from a school point of view, it also seems like to me that it's easier to control the site and the safety site at those younger levels also, just because of the way classrooms function and passing functions and size of school, numbers of people, just all of that. So, but the criteria here is for medical reasons, so that is helpful to me. Second of all, can you tell us, just as far as Wichita, Kansas, Sedgwick County is concerned, how are we as a county and as a city doing relative to testing? For example, plenty of tests available, not enough tests available, how soon the results come out, how confident we can be that the results are accurate, just all of that information we hear about testing.
And I only work in the hospital, so I'm going to pass this off probably to Dr. Reddy, but I think I know what you'll say.
Saw those eyebrows.
So I feel like as a nation, we have failed abysmally to get resources out to medical providers to be able to test patients and provide protection for our community. I cannot purchase a rapid testing machine. I've had my name in my practice for 2 months. I can't throw money at it. There are none available. And we don't have enough tests in our community to appropriately test. And I'll just chat with you really briefly about the differences between a PCR test and a rapid antigen test or a saliva test that you may have heard about that a lot of colleges are doing, WSU is doing for return to school. The PCR test is a gold standard, but it will pick up the slightest amount of COVID. So when we're testing people, if I test somebody like a child of a father who I know had COVID and who has symptoms and daycare mandated that we test them, and they come back positive, I don't know if that child really is transmitting infection. All I know is that there is some viral particle somewhere in the back of their nasopharynx that I got on my swab and that tested positive. And let's compare that to a saliva test or a rapid antigen test, like some practices you've heard about probably have, mostly on the coasts. That will pick up a much larger amount of viral particles that are present. So it's going to miss people in their really early stages who have been exposed and maybe are incubating it. And it might even miss those people who are infected but asymptomatic. But that's good. I don't care about those people because they're probably not transmitting. If they have such a low viral load that their rapid testing is negative, they're probably safe to have in the school and community, probably. A PCR test just doesn't tell us anything about transmissibility like the rapid tests can. And you know, I think Dr. Turan mentioned, but I just want to highlight too that one of the things that I think our community should be working on really hard if we want to stay safely in school is that we need to have better availability of testing. The schools and countries that have had good success have had better availability of testing, and that gives them better confidence to push forward if they had to shut for a short period. And we don't have that at our disposal right now. And I just think it's a tragedy, and it's an incredible frustration.
So is that taken into account in these recommendations to us? And I see one of the doctors shaking her head, yes.
Yeah. And we
Yes.
talked about this as a group too. We don't think there's enough people getting tested. I know there's not. And that's because of a number of factors. There's not enough testing sites, but also our culture locally discourages people from getting tested. And I can tell you lots of stories about that, but I'll give you a good one from my practice that just recently I had a child whose parents had a very particular situation where they were very concerned about COVID, understandably, and their child went to a back-to-school party. Well, she found out 3 days later that at this back-to-school party, there was a child there who was positive for COVID. And the parent of that child would not reveal the child's identity. So everyone at the party now is worried that they're exposed, and no one knows what to do because that family felt so stigmatized by letting somebody know their child had COVID that they wouldn't tell even that child's close friends and the other parents that they were close enough to that they had a back-to-school party with. And until our community starts feeling about COVID like we do about flu, we're not in a good situation. And I joke with families, but like, this isn't gonorrhea. This isn't syphilis. It's just COVID, and it's easy to transmit. So unless we can change community perspectives and attitudes about COVID so that we're all comfortable talking about it, and legislatively, we have barriers now too to talking about it. Like that is difficult for our community, and it's going to discourage people from wanting to get tested, even if we had the capacity. So there's lots of barriers in place for that.
I guess, again, I'll say, is that taken into account in putting together the numbers?
Yes,
I mean,
the data is imperfect. It's
Pardon?
imperfect.
Yeah.
And we had long discussions about the fact that in a lot of counties, probably also in Sedgwick County, that a lot of people, their case rate might be lower than it actually is because people are discouraged from being tested. But then it, yes. Yeah. And also that the percent positivity is actually, we moved it up to 15% for the highest number. A lot of other states around the nation have it around 10%. And that's because we're not sampling enough people to have a good view of the percent positivity in our county at this time.
Okay, so you guys modified the numbers because,
And if we get better,
taking into account the fact that we don't have as great a testing as we should.
and if we get better testing, it might be that we need to change those numbers in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
We don't want to stop you, so just move down to the mic and we'll have you next. That's great.
Yeah, that it might need to change if, depending on if we get much more mass testing to be a lower number.
Okay, I have one last question, and I've been following the Sedgwick County website very closely. I've been, looking at it and adding up all the numbers and doing my division and all of that, trying to fit into the criteria. And I was happy to find that you folks had put the criteria into the same box as I did. So I apparently read the charts right and did my math right. But when I opened the Sedgwick County website today or yesterday, I'm not sure when it was, but when you look at their opening page, they have this little graphic
Yes.
that talks about clusters of 15, and it kind of communicated different information to me than what I had understood previously. Yeah, you're going to put that up?
So-
And I think that's an important graphic compared to, when we're talking about our recommendation from the Department of Ed that talks about the 15 group cohorts for kids. I think that's an important thing for everybody to understand. So could you explain that graphic to me and what it's trying to communicate as far as cohorts of 15?
The clusters are when we're contact tracing, we're seeing more cases in that cluster. But when we see a lot of cases popping up that aren't a part of a known cluster, then we're getting COVID transmitted throughout the entire community. We don't know where we're getting it from. So part of how some of the Sedgwick County data is different from the KDH&E is that they do have this new non-cluster cases that if you go all the way over to the right, it's actually not that different from the new cases. It's 466 a week ago and 394 if you go all the way to the right-hand side for the most recent week. They also have separate out prisons and correctional facility residents and long-term care facility residents because you assume that those people aren't interacting with the general public as much, and a lot of times we see the clusters in those areas. KDH&E decided to keep those numbers in there because when it goes to a prison or goes to a long-term care facility, it's probably brought in by somebody who works there, a staff, a cook, somebody along those lines. So it is, in a way, community spread, and we don't know how much people are interacting with other people, whether it's a work cluster from the employees there or the actual residents there. And so this data is very complicated, but it's nice to have the extra data about the non-cluster cases.
Thank you.
We are approaching the 6 o'clock timeframe, and I just want to alert our audience that we are going to continue with this workshop, and we will take a 5-minute break before our meeting. But this is important information. We're going to continue with you all until we have all of our questions answered. So thank you. Stan Reeser?
Thank you. I appreciate the fact that we are talking about putting together a COVID-19 advisory committee. I appreciate you putting that into the PowerPoint presentation, because I think that's critical from going on no matter what we decide tonight. I'm kind of, I tend to try to be the simplifier. So if I understand this correctly, we are in moderate orange, which would mean, and then we have the decision whether to go pre-K through 5 or pre-K through 8. But let's say we go pre-K through 5. That would continue online, continue in person, as long as that's what your family household decided for your student. We would be remote at the middle school and high school, and we would have no high-risk extracurricular activities at this time. If we went by this if we went by this recommendation that your team has put together, or this PowerPoint presentation you've put together.
Yeah, and these are all directly based on the KSDE gating criteria. So I'm trying to communicate that to you.
Right.
Obviously, you see some of my personal thoughts in it as well, in the thoughts of the Kansas COVID work group for kids. I think the correction that I'm hearing you say is that in the KSD document, when you're in the orange, there's actually no extracurricular activities.
Okay.
Is the main correction.
Ben Blankley?
Yes, Ben Blankley, District 1. Sorry, I'm used to saying, because some of us have been by phone. Anyway, my question is about school activities. And so we were looking at the KSDE gating criteria, and then the Sedgwick County gating criteria is slightly different in terms of what they have offered up as what is a high-risk activity. Some are inside activities like basketball. Some are outside activities like football. And my question really is, what is the latest we know scientifically about the relative risk with outside activities versus inside activities, close contact activities versus spread apart activities? Kind of trying to figure out, is there a pathway where we could possibly be in an orange scenario and allow, let's say, marching band outside in a gigantic stadium, or golf, where we have community golfers that have been golfing since April. Does that make sense? That's not really a well-formed question, but it's right. Yeah.
I'll say one thing and then probably pass it off to Dr. Reddy again. I think the best place to look is the National Federation for High School. I don't know all the acronyms, but they're high school sports and activities. And then there was a band and orchestra funded study where they came out with a lot of recommendations, and I think those are in one of the links I have on the last page. But still, when you're in orange zone, I don't see how you can prioritize extracurricular and those school activities without prioritizing getting kids in school for academics. I know it's really important. It was very important for me to play sports here at North High School. But it was also important for me to learn math and reading and the other extra classes I took.
So I should say that I am a parent of 3 teenagers, and they're all athletes or have recently been athletes in 259, so this affects them directly. But I agree that there are things that are more important than academics. I think that we could have some modified intramurals to continue doing sports that are maybe moderate risk. And I put my own son's sport in the moderate to high risk category, soccer, because soccer is not just kicking the ball back and forth. But the things that we know are safe are things that are easily done outside with natural social distancing. So tennis, cross country, golf, those things are easy and they're no-brainers. And the more that we can do sports outside, the easier we can classify moderate risk sports into lower risk. Like if we had outdoor volleyball courts, that moderate risk sport becomes a little bit more acceptable. I don't think I would put it in that category when we're in the orange zone though, because we've already made modifications for our orange zone. And I think it's a little bit more lenient than the Sedgwick County document, which is directly adapted from the Johnson County gating criteria.
Okay, that answers. Thank you.
Mike Rhodey?
Yeah, thank you again for coming. I'm probably the most thankful that, because I'm trying to do this on a science deal and the science hasn't been there for me. My first question is on this chart with the 3 boxes, what's the correlation between, is there a correlation between those 3 different areas? Is there something that is common to all 3, or is it completely 3 different base criterias?
So I thought a lot about this. I think our whole group has. And, you know, the commonality is that everyone, everywhere, is going to be in 100% agreement when every green box is filled or when every red box is filled. The commonality is that when there is discrepancy across zones, everybody is going to have a somewhat non-scientific interpretation of what they want to happen. And honestly, that's all it is. It's a little bit fudgy. Our data is not perfect, so we have to rely on what we have and what we know about our community. But it's a little bit fudgy now, and I can't tell you that everybody's ever going to be all on the same page until we're all green, or God forbid, we're all red. So we just have to kind of trust one another and be flexible and work hard together to figure out what we feel is the best pathway forward. I can't tell you how many times in the last month I have had personal conversations with families who can't figure out what they want to do, remote or in person. And my advice to them is have a discussion, make your choice, and move forward. And once you move forward, you will feel better about it. You will make it work better. And if you made a wrong choice, if you have a chance to steer the other way, then you take it. But we can't just discuss these options endlessly. We need to make a choice and move forward strongly, boldly, and figure out how it's going to work for our community. There's no good answer.
Stephanie Coleman again. I just wanted to add a little bit to that too, that, you know, when the data points are crossing different lines too, that's where we also really, really recommended that advisory committee for you guys. Because the advisory committee can bring a medical perspective. It can bring what's going on in the hospital systems, what's going on in our community, and it gives all those different perspectives to really give you guys more help in making those decisions. So I can't stress enough having that advisory committee just to help interpret some of the data and have dialogue, because it's so important to have those different perspectives from our community to really understand what is going on in our community. So
You speak of this advisory committee, who would that be?
sure. I would say, obviously, members of your Board of Education, and I understand that you can't meet more than 3, so I would say three board members. I would say, obviously, Dr. Thompson in hospital administration, or hospital, I work in a hospital, school administration, I apologize. I would definitely have some medical personnel, some business or community leaders, definitely parents in the community that could represent those. Kimber, as your district nurse leader, should be on that committee as well. Teachers, selection of maybe some principals, teachers, but you want a representative of everybody. I'm sorry? But that can give the whole big perspective of what's going on. So.
Okay, and when you, and I understand what you're saying, I just want to make sure that everybody's clear. How often would this group meet?
Sure. I would say as often as you need to. So I'm on one of those committees for another district, and right now we're meeting, well, it was supposed to be every 2 weeks. We actually are meeting weekly at the moment until we kind of make a decision in the next few weeks.
So with this chart that I'm seeing, I think we were choosing one point, which was the Sedgwick County's 14-day rolling average. And you're saying that we should be choosing at least three criteria to come back to school. Would that be a fair comment?
Yes, these are all epidemiological ways to look at disease spread in a community, and all of them are imperfect because we don't have a start date and a stop date, and it's just a rolling average. So when we have three, it makes us make a better informed decision.
Okay. And one last question, and I know we touched on this, the social emotional part of it. Out of the thousands of emails I got in the last week, 60% of them talked either one way about we need to bring our kids back because the social skills that we need to keep with our kids in school and how it's affecting them mentally. And the other percentage was we need to keep our kids out of school because it's too dangerous for them to be there, either for their parents or their kids. Again, I think you said before it was the medical side, but is that, how can I explain that to somebody if they ask me that question after tonight? What's more important, the social or the medical?
I'll let you answer.
I'm Kelly Netson. I'm one of the psychologists at KU. I think the answer is they're both important, and that's why this is so difficult. And I think for some kids, the medical piece is more important. If you've got a kid who's high risk in a medical category or engaged in high-risk activities, or maybe has a family who's non-compliant with some of the risk mitigation strategies, then the medical piece may be more important. If you've got a kid who's got premorbid depression or anxiety or is receiving their mental health care through school, and that's, their only avenue for those services, then I think the mental health piece and the social emotional piece may be more important for that kid. I think that's where your parent choice strategy comes into play and why families are able to choose what's most important for their family. But I also think we have to consider that these KSDE criteria are also a piece of what's best for the community as a whole. And it's an impossible position to be in, to balance all of those factors together. So that's why I think using those criteria that are based in science, that are based in epidemiology, give you some guidance to help you make those impossible decisions.
So to make sure I heard you right, and I think I did, you're saying that the medical side of it's more important unless your child is in some kind of a psychological need to be back in school.
No, that's not exactly what I said. I think it
That's why I
varies
ask.
based on the child.
Right.
I think there are many factors that go into that, and we could spend hours talking about my patient load and how that all fits. But I think that's where the parent choice model comes into play. Parents are going to have to make that decision for their own child based on their own situation.
Okay. One last question. You showed here on one of the pages about athletics, and it was talking about clusters in sports with 9 clusters. Where are these cases from? Do you know?
That's from the KDH&E website. I don't know exactly which counties and which sports events those are each from.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time and your efforts.
Mr. Rohde, I just wanted to give you a little bit like different perspective, just a more blunt club perspective, I think, and the way that I think about the COVID risks, the social emotional versus the health risks. And I don't mean this in a bad way at all, but I'm a pediatrician and I care for children. And the risk to children of COVID, not so much. Not so much at all. Honestly. We think that maybe upwards of 70% of kids, and again, like our medical understanding, our medical science is not definite, upwards of 70% get this and have the slightest cold or are so asymptomatic that their parents don't even notice. It doesn't really come to their attention. And in the entire country so far, we have only had 90 pediatric deaths. Last year we had about 230, I think, influenza deaths from children. So keep that in mind. But, for children, like the risks that are very real are hunger. Makes me sick thinking about all the kids who are hungry. Yes. Abuse, mental health problems. I'm a parent of teens. I care for a lot of teens. I was telling Dr. Tran, I had a bad day today. I had 2 suicidal teens in my office who go to 259 schools. And then, there's safety concerns that we have for children as well. And my concerns are that there'll be substandard care in large group makeshift daycare type areas for kids if we don't open schools. So safety is a huge concern. But then you have to pair that with the adults. And the risk to adults for COVID is very real. We have had more than 170,000 deaths in the United States already. We are the leader in the globe for deaths from COVID. And just to give that perspective, that's been over like a 5-month period. Influenza deaths that we measure over about a 6-month period. Usually we have about 50,000 deaths per year, roughly. And then the other adult risk, I think, is lost work. And women are going to shoulder most of that burden. And also low-wage workers who don't have anything else to do with their children. And immigrants who, in general, don't feel as comfortable working our systems as somebody who's lived here for generations. So it's disproportionately going to impact minorities and women, who also, minorities, are more at risk of death from COVID. So the disparities that we'll see will be widened. And socioeconomically as well, like there will be wider disparities for adults.
I think that's been the best explanation I've heard.
Julie Hedrick.
Okay, I don't know if you can see my computer, Dr. Tran, but this is the graphic that I'd like for you to explain to us. See, they're talking about, it says it's not the numbers. I mean, I'll let you explain it.
No, the 15. I think the 15 is the number that KSDE and Sedgwick County Health Department, that if we can keep groups of kids in smaller than 15, then it's going to be a safer cohort for just separating and then contact tracing also and limiting exposure. When I look at that, I think it's very confusing. I agree. But that for schools that try to keep our class sizes low, you might have a lead teacher who has maybe more than 15 kids, but then you have a para so that the kids are never in a group of more than 15, and you work together in some way to do that. But I think 15 is the magic number based on that.
And then also to keep those that group of 15, to keep them separated from another group of 15.
Yeah, so throughout the day they go, they stay with their group, they lunch with their group, they go to recess with their group, and that 15 gets the swing set for that period of time, and the other 15 don't.
Can I make a comment? One of the things we didn't really talk about too was the fact that we talked about elementary schools needed to be on site because of learning and developmental and things like that. The other thing that elementary school does is put kids in natural cohorts. So we do feel like it is safer than your middle schools and your high schools where kids are passing and transitioning in and out of different classrooms. So your elementary school kids are already in a natural cohort in their classrooms, and that also is evident in, being able to keep in those smaller sizes, smaller cohorts, less transmission to other people, things like that. So that's also another thing for you guys to consider.
Ernestine Crable? Yes, Ernestine Crable, District 3. What is the risk of the children being non-symptomatic and transmitting it to the adults in their setting, for example, the teachers or the para? We've seen, and you've commented on how that adults are more likely to get it and more likely to be sick. How, if we have, and we are taking these temperatures, we're going to be doing that so that everybody's temperature, and we are begging parents, please don't give your child Tylenol to make the fever go down and take them to school. What is the risk of these children transmitting it to the adults that are caring for them?
The best single study we have on this is out of South Korea, but there's a lot of other contact tracing kind of case reports and studies that we look at too. For kids less than 10, if I'm remembering right, it was around 1% of kids less than 10 who were confirmed positive with COVID transmitted it to one of their household contacts. But kids older than 10, was it 18% of them passed it on to household contacts? Still, teenagers and other adults can transmit it to household contacts at a much higher rate than community contacts. But if you're together with them for 8 hours a day in a small cohort, then you're fudging the line between still wearing masks, but whether you're a household contact or a community contact. But masking will help. The social distancing, the cohorting, the washing your hands and all that stuff will help so much. But especially in that 0 to 10, it's very even low risk for them to transmit it to even their household contacts.
Okay, thank you. Yesterday, and I guess I don't know how to read the Sedgwick County Health Department's charts, because yesterday what I saw was that it said 9.7, and what I saw today is it was over 10. Now, what was it talking about when it was 9.7 yesterday and it's over 10 today? Was it that 2-week period, or was it?
Yeah.
What was it?
The 9.7 that I thought I saw today was the rolling 2-week average, but I think still the best thing to look at is probably that chart that you have to dig further down to get to that chart on their website.
Yes, you do.
I think there's a hyperlink in the slide set, but you don't Google Sedgwick County Health Department COVID stats. You just go to Sedgwick County Health Department, and then you scroll down about half the page, and then I forgot exactly what it says, but it says like reopening metrics, I think is what it was.
Reopening metrics is what it's called?
Okay. Yeah. And they're updating Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Right?
Okay.
I don't know if this is helpful to you, Ernestine, but like I said earlier, I've been following the data a lot, every day and during the day and stuff. And the numbers will occasionally change by a few, which what I assumed that meant was that some more test results came in. So it was a test from a particular day, but the result didn't come in till like the next day. And so the data numbers are very, very close. I mean, they're not significantly changing, but there are, like a number or two difference in one of the columns for tests or positives or negatives as the results come in. So I did see, like you did, I saw the one number one time when I looked, and it's a different number, very slightly changed, probably not enough that it's going to impact us, but the numbers aren't necessarily exactly the same number every time you look at it, because tests are being taken and tests are coming in, and it's part of the dilemma that you said of that it's not starting at one point and ending at a point and having to be done. It's a thing that's happening, and it's evolving hour by hour by hour.
Yeah, we're living in crazy times.
Okay,
That's all.
Mike?
Another question, we've talked about aerosol, and I've had a lot of questions about HVAC systems. And does the mask take away the aerosols, or does it? And my next question is before she gets there, because that'll make it easier. I've got two different kind of masks. I've got this mask, which is a cloth mask, and I'm wearing this mask that the district gives me. Which one's better, or are they the same, or are they different, or?
Go ahead, because I have a different point that's related.
There are some things that I think the district has already looked at to help with their HVAC systems, and they're updating those, and I really appreciate that for my own kids being in school this year. The question was about how these surgical masks are considered personal protective equipment for healthcare workers, and especially if we pair those with a face shield, because all day long when I'm in the hospital, I have to have one of these plastic shields in front of my face, and it's not fun, but I do it. That's enough to consider me not being a close contact with somebody if I'm within 6 feet, even if they have COVID positive, and that's great protection. The cloth masks are not medical grade, but they're gonna decrease tons and tons of transmissions if everybody's wearing them within the school.
Okay, and that makes sense. And you said something that creates another question for me. If I'm wearing one of these types of masks, I'm assuming this is like what you're wearing,
Yeah.
and I'm not 6 feet apart from my nearest person, that's not important anymore because I've got the mask on that is surgical grade. Is that?
I think that per Sedgwick County Health Department, to not be a close contact within 6 feet they're still at 10 minutes. Sedgwick County is within 6 feet for 10 minutes. The CDC is 6 feet for 15 minutes. You have to have both a surgical mask and a face shield or an N95 respirator with goggles on. So it's
Okay.
covering the eyes too. So this is difficult, but so even with just a surgical mask, I think based on their criteria, you would still be a close contact.
So we still, because it's the eyes that are exposed, would stop the 6 foot.
The eyes
would
and the
require
extra
6 foot.
protection that the shield can provide
Right.
for the,
Okay,
surgical
I
mask.
understand what you're saying.
And then we talk about percentage exposure. So if you're wearing a really tight-fitting surgical mask, and you're wearing glasses or eye exposure or a shield, you will catch probably, we think, around 95% of infected drops. So there's going to be some aerosol that escapes out the corners where I have gaps here and where you will have gaps. And for cloth face masks, we want them to be at least 2-ply. So 2-ply, well-made face masks that are well-fitting. They are probably about 65 to 70% catching of all infectious dropules. So that's positive. That helps a lot. Not quite as much, but it's still really good, especially if everyone is wearing masks. And then really the whole point of talking about what percentages is caught is that dose exposure counts. So there's plenty of ICU workers who have had combative patients who are confused and sedated on lots of medications who have, kind of attacked them. And knocked aside their protective gear and coughed in their face. That is a really, really high dose exposure, and that person's going to get sick. They might get really sick. Just like when kids cough in my face during flu season and I wasn't wearing my glasses, or I do a strep screen and they spew in my face, I'm going to get it. But if you put a mask on, and I put a mask on, and there's some aerosolized particles floating all around in our souped up HVAC systems, even if you get exposed, your dose exposure will be much lower. So even if you are, in theory, a high-risk person, you're less likely to get rapid onset, hard, fast, severe illness. So dose exposure counts. And so that's why everybody needs to wear a mask and not worry so much about what kind it is, because they all help decrease dose exposure.
Okay, so I appreciate that. One last question, and it's something that you haven't breached today, and I don't know if you want to. Vaccine. Where we at on that? And if you don't want to answer it, I get it, that's a tough one.
We'll be in this spot until we have a good and safe vaccine, which I don't think I can comment any better than other news outlets or other people out there.
Yeah, I talked recently to one of our ICU directors at Wesley, Dr. Chloe Steinschauer, who sat in on a couple of privileged meetings that vaccine manufacturers have had with government entities. And we think that there's a very, very, very small chance that there will be a vaccine available until early this spring in the first part. And in the second part, yes, I think it's going to be very safe, because all parties involved understand the risk of releasing a vaccine that is not safe in the midst of a pandemic. Can you imagine?
Yes.
So, like, I want it. And then thirdly, there will be a difficulty at some level with producing enough vaccine to meet demand. And I think we all know who the highest risk categories will be, who will probably get it first. Like, I think that's going to be the over 80 in facilities population, and the ICU and critical care providers who are going to sustain all of our lives if we ever become critically ill. And then after that, there's going to be a big argument about it. And I'll tell you that my experience as a pediatrician is that kids always come last, because they don't vote and they're not independent enough to protest. So, like, I'll let people just mull on that and think on that as they're debating what to do with our children's futures.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you all very, very much. And I think we're at the end of our questions, but I just want to, because we have to move into a meeting now, and we will be making some decisions. We will have a decision by the time we leave tonight on where we are. But before we do that, we're going to have to adjust our chart to be able to accomplish the kinds of things that we've discussed tonight. So I want to make sure that we are all on the same page while you are still with us. Our decision points tonight are do we go 5, 8, or do we go pre-K 5? So it's pre-K 5, pre-K 8 from our discussion on Monday. That was still left open. And then so what I've heard you say is that for bringing kids back to school, we should stay with pre-K 5. Is that a correct statement?
Correct.
Okay. Second decision that we're going to have to make tonight is about how long we hold kids out before we look at, if we put this COVID advisory committee, which actually we will be doing that, if we put that together to give us advice, how long do we stay out? We had talked about 9 weeks, we had talked about a semester, we talked about a month. What is kind of your feeling in that area?
If we're able to get pre-K through 5 back, and then we see that over the next month, even with Labor Day and other things that could possibly see a spike, I think it'd be amazing to get the 6th grade through 12th back sometime this fall. So I don't necessarily, because if we look at the Sedgwick County data, we see like we're in a fairly good trend, or at least stable, maybe decreasing. And if our community does the right thing, then we can get into a better spot. So it's hard for me to make that decision, but from my standpoint, it'd be great to have another look at it.
About a month or
Maybe
5
a
weeks
month or
after
so,
school started.
something like that, yeah.
Okay. And you absolutely are not recommending a semester. You're saying 9 weeks at the most, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Next decision is the KDHD new data points, and we'll have to talk about that, but you've brought those to us and we appreciate it. Then we've got to talk about sports, and it's my understanding you're saying when we're in orange, we don't do sports or extracurricular activities.
Yeah, my recommendation would be just in general, instead of trying to create your own rubric for this, is to simply just adopt a KSDE.
Which in
rubric.
that, it says no high contact sports, but it doesn't address the other extracurricular activities.
And I don't know if I've seen those specifics, but here,
In
orange,
orange,
it
it
says-
says remote only.
yeah, remote only for all activities, and then yellow would still be no high-risk activities.
Okay. And I think, the last decision point that we're going to have to make is about school, after-school activities, is the no spectators. But you absolutely are saying, if we don't do this, you don't bring spectators in, period. And we're going to have to look at it carefully for spectators, even if at some point in time we can move to yellow. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay. You all have been wonderful. You have brought us the baseline medical data that we really need so we can feel comfortable about continuing on and making the right decisions for this district. Thank you. You are more than welcome to stay through our meeting. You never know, we may have more questions. We will take a 5-minute break, and then we will start our regular BOE meeting.